wind back the clock some time ago, and you may remember that David Cameron called the Brexit referendum in a basic attempt to try and bring his party together. And as a result, now under Boris Johnson, the Conservative Party has split even more than anyone could even predict, because the ERG, or the European Research Group, were always cast as the party within the party. And now there are parties within that party, because you've got the Northern Research Group, the COVID and Recovery Group, you've got the Free Market Fundamentalist Group, or the Freedom and Culture Party, of whatever they call themselves. That's at least three groups, not also forgetting the ERG themselves. So it's only a matter of time before these groups really do collide, and this is going to be a significant problem for not only Boris Johnson going forward, but any Conservative Party leader for some significant time, because these groups aren't going to go away, because once again, leave it up to the Brexiteers to actually come and destroy British democracy. These groups are perpetually going to be following in the Faragist mode of perpetual disloyalty and disruption. And here's the thing, you can't appease all these groups. You can only appease one at a time and only annoy the other two. So there is just permanent chaos in the Tory party, and this is really a moment Labour should be thankful for and taking a lot of advantage for, because they can, as we've always said, when the Tory party is weak and divided, they are a weak party, and this leads to colossal screw-ups, scandals, and just general, even complete and utter unelectability. So this is really Labour's time to shine. So before we get into today's article covering this, please do remember to hit that like and share button. Also, down below there are links to my Patreon page, as well as a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, well, buy me a coffee. So thank you very much to the people that do support me that way, and on with today's article. So, this comes from The Guardian, and it is, can't be led, won't be led. Johnson's backbench rebels are incapable of loyalty. Conservative rebels have been setting the agenda in British politics for so long now that it's almost something almost quaint about the expectation of loyalty to a Tory leader. Last December, Boris Johnson led his party to its biggest election victory in more than 30 years. The gratitude of his MPs, measured in obedience to whips, has not even lasted 12 months. The scale of the election victory is partly to blame for the unravelling of discipline of Johnson's troops are not afraid of Labour, and obedience to the Prime Minister is boring. The era has long passed when Conservatives saw the fulfilment of a duty to support the government as its own reward. Conservative MPs are notoriously unsettled with serving leaders, and Margaret Thatcher was not spared defenestration in 1990, despite a landslide victory just 3 years earlier. The unity of the mid-1980s, the Tory glory years from the Falklands to the poll tax, has not been repeated since. In opposition, David Cameron secured a wary alliance on the condition that he win big. He fell short of a majority and made his MPs power share with the Liberal Democrats. The indignity was never forgiven. Cameron held his party together by building against UKIP for the alliance of the right, and he won, to the extent that Nigel Farage only poached 2 of his MPs and they lost. To that extent, Farage's signature policies became a defining creed of the Tories. If Johnson thought the rebellious tendency would be quelled by delivery of Brexit, he misunderstood its hold on the Conservative Party. A decade of Congress with Faragism, swapping activists and ideas, has produced a hybrid. It is not a coincidence that the European Research Group, the party within a party that tormented Theresa May, has many members in common with the new COVID recovery group. Hardline Euroscepticism is not a precondition for the lockdown scepticism, but there is a correlation on the Tory benches, and there is an overlap of an ideological code. The ERG and the CRG are a variant strains of the same libertarian aversion to regulation. The view that it inhibits commerce, suffocates freedom, and, in the more paranoid imagination, subverts democracy. But for decades, Brussels was the origin of that threat, and the softness on Europe was a corruption that had to be drummed out of the Tory leaders. This is less of an issue with Johnson. It might, of course, come up again if he signs any kind of deal involving any hint of compromise with the EU in the coming weeks, however. But the righteous indignation of the backbench freedom fighters is the energy that obeys the laws of Tory thermodynamics. It cannot be destroyed, only transferred. It now drives resistance to the social and economic controls intended to stop the spread of COVID-19. And away from Parliament, people might find all sorts of reasons to dislike the government's handling of the pandemic, but it is something else for dozens of Johnson's own MPs who declare his judgment faulty on something so grave. They do not trust the Prime Minister to make the right call when it comes to the best public health emergency of a generation, where the consequences of getting it wrong are measured in the deaths of their constituents. And since Johnson continually frivolous with it, it is easy to lose sight of what a serious breakdown that represents in the relationship between the leader and the party. The rebels are indicating that they cannot be led, and they will not be led either. That does not mean support is withdrawn for it, however, but it must be procured, and some can be bought with promises of promotion. Others will have their rebellious maws temporarily stuffed with pork barrel money. The Prime Minister's relationship with the zealous right was always transactional, and they used each other. He adopted their Eurosceptic fanaticism as a route to power, and they were glad that his charisma diluted their reputation as cranks. They also needed a Brexit figurehead to rival Farage, but for all the time that Johnson was cozying up to the ERG, no one imagined that he enjoyed comradeship with the likes of Peter Bone and Steve Barker. Johnson registered only Jacob Rees-Mogg as a serious figure, partly because they went to the same school, but mainly because he had a cult following of his amiable cartoon tough act that rivaled the Boris act for audience share. In policy terms, there is not much to distinguish a Johnson Brexit from a Farage one, but the Tory leader would not want people to think that they were cut from the same cloth. He dabbles in demagoguery, and there is no discernible ethical boundary he won't cross, but his natural comfort zone is more in the establishment of Tory tradition. He had a formidable campaigning alliance with Dominic Cummings and the Vote Leave team, but their wrecking ball ethos ill benefits the image of he had of himself as a statesman in the same lineage of Churchill. Cummings and his Leave ally, Lee Kane, were ousted in the recent mismanagement crisis in Number 10, the trigger for which was Kane's angling for the job of Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister. That role has instead been fulfilled by Dan Rosfield, a former investment banker and Treasury official. Ronsfield is admired by the ecumenical Tories as the kind of non-revolutionary fixer who was meant to be the swept aside by the hard rain that Cummings had planned for Whitehall. Changes in Downing Street personnel do not indicate a new policy direction, however, least of all on Brexit, where the negotiating constraints are unchanged and the character of the Prime Minister is beyond reform. Indecision and attention to detail and short-term thinking leading to an atmosphere of perpetual crisis that will just become the norm. Johnson has revelled in a limit to his revolutionary zeal. The anti-establishment banner hoisted over the Brexit cause was never a credible banner for the Tory party, at least not the traditional one that would always prefer continuity and old privilege to ideology and upheaval. And that is Johnson's party at heart, but it is not quite the party that he now leads. This new Conservative Party took a gigantic implant from the Faragist mode of perpetual opposition. It has an indistinction against authority in its DNA. Johnson might procure periods of calm and spells of continuity unity, but he will never enjoy the full loyalty of his MPs. His government will be in a constant negotiation with implacable rebels. The rest of us will just be merely held hostage to them. And I just completely agree. This is going to be, like I say, it all depends on what happens with this Brexit deal. And we know one is coming, we just don't know when. But the question is, what's it going to be? You know, I've said before, I don't think Johnson is insane enough to put the entire British economy just for the risk of the British fishing industry. No one would go to the wall for it. It's just absolutely impossible. But of course, this will give Farage and many of those, you know, those in that new party in the ERG particularly will not trust him. And of course, there is the threat that Farage will come back with a new party. And what will that do? Because Farage's plan was always to help push the Tory party more right, and in that he has succeeded. And now he will create a new party in the same vein of UKIP and push the Tory party even further right, which will have huge detrimental consequences to people, normal people like you and me, who do not want any of those policies or any of that type of stuff going on. But as I've once and always said, there is going to be a very, very huge push to get rid of so many rights and regulations next year, and the Brexit referendum will be used as justification to get rid of it. And I've said, lots of people, it is coming, we just have to wait for it. And I highly suspect next year we will see some sort of new refreshed manifesto released, like the Building Britain Better, as we saw just a couple of months ago. Well, yeah, a couple of months ago now. I think we will actually see that, but even more. And as I've often worried about, we're going to see austerity on steroids. You know, it is the Tories recognised very quickly that they actually had to continue to help support people, but again, it's nowhere near the amount of support people actually need. And there are going to be a lot of upset people, especially in the North, who had Tory MPs and they are not helping them in the slightest. And they are worried themselves that they aren't going to last more than one term. And quite rightly so, because if you've seen the polling numbers recently, lots of these seats are swinging back to Labour. And remember, their majorities were wafer thin to begin with. Because next time, there will be no Labour Party alternatives. There won't be, well, I'm going to vote for the Liberal Democrats because I want a hung parliament, even though, again, we've been over the ridiculousness of that argument. And then there won't be a Brexit party to vote for because they want a super hard Brexit. They don't want a Conservative Party either because they won't vote for that. The parties that pulled votes away from Labour will not be there at that next election. And as a result, I think you will see continuous, almost very hung parliaments, or with very small commanding majorities going forward. But again, we'll have to see. We'll have to wait and see. That's some proper crystal ball gazing for you. But anyway, as always, please do hit that like and share button, and of course, please do look down below and visit my Patreon page and my one-off donation link, Buy Me a Coffee, where you can buy me a coffee. And thank you very much to the people that do support me that way. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all next time.